Well, hello. Um, Thanks for stopping by and checking this out. The image here might make some of you curious. Um, if there was ever an image of um, working class youth in Canada, it would be something along these lines. Those are what you would call, they're not plaid shirts, but they're called, they're lumber jackets. They would call them. Some would call them Macs, which is kind of like a misnomer. But yeah, there was a time, a period in the early 80s and late 70s where a lot of young men would wear these. They were some sort of symbol, some sort of standoff symbol of working class separating itself, much like something that I'm going to discuss concerning some ideas for future reads coming up. I thought it might be interesting, just for shits and giggles, to trip back down the memory hole and consider some of the first books that came under my perusal. First times I actually first times and the first books I ever completed, I guess, as a young person, as far back as between the ages of 12 and 13. And I've picked three of these books. The illustration that you're looking at is from one of them. And the three I picked, I'm not going to rank them or grade them or compare them to literature, great or small, just that there was a personal attachment to them. And like most of the things I do concerning my reads on the channel, it's really my own self-indulgence, so you're going to have to bear with me. You have the choice to give a listen or not. But yes, as I said, I picked three. And before I get into the three, I just want to give us some background on the one and how I, as a kid, was introduced to it. Now, this took place on, well, from where I'm standing now, pretty much on the other side of the country. I live in Canada. And in those days, this was before I had ever read a book or completed a novel or whatever. Frankly, wasn't really interested. I had barely begun in the previous year, began to read, period, and that was mostly comic books at the time, the superheroes and whatnot, Spidey and all that. Having fun there, but most of the time was spent playing road hockey with my friends, or, we were, going to Little League Baseball and actually Little League Football too, Pee Wee Vision. I remember that. But anyway, this was all taking place in a place called Burnaby, BC. And at the time, we were going, that would be 1981, I believe it was. Yes, 1981. And I was going to a public school named Gilmore Public School. I believe that's the name of it. I lived down the way a bit, a few blocks away, on a street called Eaton Street. Anywho, our class, in those days and at that time, there wasn't a lot of travel between classes here and there, back and forth, whatnot. So most of our, both math and English and what they'd call social studies, geography, even some of the history, whatever, all kind of took place in one classroom, that is. And our teacher's name was Mrs. Domigen. And all the boys in the class, even in grade 5, at 11 years old, we all had, like, a big crush on Mrs. Domigen. She was this beautiful, swarthy skinned, chestnut brown haired, a Greek single lady. And all the boys were knocked out. Of course, it was our age, too. I remember she would come to our baseball games, too, later in the evening sometimes, and that was always a hoot. But one day, in particular, I remember she came to the front of the class, as per usual, walked from her desk, and said, "Listen up, okay, everybody sit down." And she basically sat on one of the desks that were up front. If you remember the desks of those days, I don't know how it is in the classrooms today so much. Probably not too much has changed, but they were these units where you kind of like slide into them, where the desk would slide over you'd slide your knees underneath the desk, and there was a compartment underneath where you could stick your books and pencils and stuff, with a little pencil rest up in the hard part of the desk that you would write on and stuff. Well, she would sit on top of the front one, which happened to be vacant, and she had a book in her hand, and she said it was our time for silent reading, but she decided, and I'm paraphrasing here, I can remember a lot, but not everything. She said something along these lines. Today I thought we'd do something a little bit different. Someone has passed on to me this book, and I thought we could read it together. So if you want to sit down, and she introduced the name of the book and the author, flipped through the pages. We were all silent. We kind of looked at each other. This was different, whatever. I don't know. Didn't know what to expect. She had never done this kind of thing before. And we didn't have copies of the books or the material, which is usually the case in something like English or English class or whatever when the time comes. And she began to read. Chapter 1. When I stepped out into the bright sunlight from the darkness of the movie house, I had only 2 things on my mind: Paul Newman and a ride home. Some of you will recognize those famous lines. Some of you don't have a clue. I'm quite sure of it. But, of course, most of us who have either seen the film or are of that generation or have read the book know that is the opening lines, the first page, opening lines of the book, The Outsiders, right? S.E. Hinton's, The Outsiders. And that was our introduction to it. And the coolest thing about it is that, books were kind of like I said, kind of like the furthest things from our mind. We're thinking about recess or lunch when we could go out to the field and play touch football with whichever kid got the latest Nerf football. Those Nerf footballs, they didn't last long, but, some kid was always getting a new one or whatever, and we couldn't wait to get our fucking hands all over it. Anyway. Yeah, it was a time of chase the girls and touch football. Then it became touch the girls, but that's a different story. That's much later. I'm not endorsing anything here. I'm just talking about life. But anyway, as kids, books weren't on the menu. Comic books for me, for sure. I was kind of into that. A lot of kids were. Back then, there were a lot more comic book readers, I would say, than you'd see today. But then again, that was more about reading, period. And I suppose a lot of kids that went on to develop a love for reading um, probably started out reading the comic books. I know that was the case for me. But at this time, I hadn't completed a book, as I said, but something interesting had happened. That, although we weren't impressed with the idea of being read to or anything, um, as she would continue to read the book, I guess a chapter at a time or whatever, I can't recollect each uh, session of the read of The Outsiders, but, I know for me, I was looking forward to it. And I had noticed that my buddies and stuff, when it was time, we wanted to know what was happening and what was going on, and we're all leaning in, listening. There was no interruptions. I'm telling you, like, we were just hushed and we listened. And well, it wasn't long after that my family had moved, not a great distance, but just up the street from Gilmore was Hastings Avenue, which, in fact, if you travel down it towards Vancouver, past the P&E and into the heart of downtown, is now one of the seediest, drug-saturated places, oh God, in North America? I don't know, dare I say certain parts of the world, but whatever. Now, at that time, downtown Hastings had already had like a reputation for crime and drugs, and a certain population that was stereotyped because of so many incidences and poverty. But anyway, I need not get into that. But so same road, but not so far down at this time. We traveled from Burnaby down just past, I believe it's called Boundary Lane, which divides Burnaby and Vancouver. And we moved into a house that was just one street over from Hastings, known as Franklin. And I started attending Franklin Public School there for, let's see now, grade 6. You see, in Vancouver, as opposed to Ontario, high school starts in grade 7. That's another story altogether. But I would like to mention something interesting here, just a little factoid. Getting ready for high school. How did this work now? Yeah, my application was for the high school known as Vancouver Tech. And what Vancouver Tech was actually a vocational school. Me and my buddies at the time, going to Franklin, getting ready for high school, we were of, I guess you could call it a subgroup. We were the kids that were, there was only a handful of us, but we were smoking cigarettes and we were smoking other things long before we even tipped our first beers. We were interested in growing up in a hurry, I suppose, and we thought we were pretty tough. But in those days, I remember identifying with something. We were getting ready to go to Vancouver Tech, but the reason we were choosing a vocational school, I think of it now, and it wasn't just a love for the trades or wanting to work with your hands. It had a lot to do with the fact that a lot of the kids that we were foolishly looking up to were street toughs. And we're talking like weekend fighters, brawlers. They, I don't know, lower working class backgrounds. And, I don't know, a lot of running around. Everything seemed to be, like in that neighborhood as well as a few others in East Van, it was all about, I don't know, how tough you were. And getting out of scrapes and all that. Even if you were or weren't. There are other stories about that, which is interesting too. At a time of growing up, becoming aware of girls too, as well as a time where God, you're about to lose a great deal of your innocence. Too much for some of us too soon. But anyway, at that time, me and a buddy, uh, uh, I'll just give initials because I don't think it's fair to all the people that. Um, his name was JD, and he was still going to school at Gilmore, and he'd come down to my neighborhood, and I'd go up to his, back and forth. It was close enough to travel here and there, and but we got word that there was a new movie coming out. It was called The Outsiders. And we knew of it because of Mrs. Domigen's class, and of course we were going to go see it. So we went and saw it. And it had impact on us. Shit, we knew what it was about. We knew what the greasers were about. We knew about the kind of clout that was hanging over, I don't know, our neighborhood and some of the kids that wouldn't associate with us. A lot of a lot of it, a lot of the um, distancing we did, the standoff attitude, probably a lot of it was self-imposed. When I think about it back then, there were actually a lot of people that you would find that you could hang with if you just got to know them and stuff. And I say that concerning girls, which we really didn't have much of a clue of, but we had to feel our way through. Um, but I remember seeing the movie, and at that time, uh, I had picked up one of my first novels to read. I, I was aware of The Outsider paperback here floating around here and there, but I don't believe I had read it at that point. But I did pick up a book in the library at the time, which I won't rave about. I don't really know how I feel about it, but it was one of the first books I read, and I don't know why I read it and completed it. It was by a Canadian novelist, and which I don't know, for some reason struck me. Um, you know, for some reason it struck me. Uh, right, Kevin Major, and it was called Hold Fast. I think what struck me was the Lumberjackets, because at the time there was already I don't know, it was some sort of dress code. You know, I suppose you find in different areas different things that would trend. But anyway, I don't have much to say about it, but I saw that and I thought, that's interesting. That looks like me, my friends. What's going on here? And but anyway, I started reading the book, and I did. I read it to completion. I'm going to tell you right now. Um, I decided to add it to the list simply because it was one of the first books I ever finished, completed, and I haven't read it since. I did find a copy of it in a thrift store, and I thought, oh my god, I gotta grab that just for keepsakes, in the sense that this is one of the first books. I just remember some of his references to his family life and some of the bands he was mentioning at the time, and stuff. It's kind of obscure, but whatever. That was one of them, the books that I wanted to add, and actually this is an illustration from that. I probably shouldn't have said that. I don't want to cause any copyright problems, but yeah, it was. And the other one was, of course, The Outsiders. Now, that came shortly after. In the summer of '83, me, my two brothers, and our father made a long journey from Vancouver to Toronto. And at the time, when we found a place to stay, we were renting a house in York, or North York, whatever. And going to a public school, it was called Kane. I believe it was called Kane. And our teacher there, Mr. Carter, also, well, we barely moved from that class either, except for gym, math, and music, whatever. But we'd spend a lot of time in there, and we'd have a silent reading session, and he was pretty diligent on the book reporting and stuff to make sure that we were actually reading the books of our choice, which was nice. And that's when I had picked up on the reading of The Outsiders. By this time, I had heard it, read through, I had seen the movie, so I decided to read it myself. And I also read S.E. Hinton's book Rumblefish, too, which I don't have a copy of, but same thing. Kind of enjoyed it. For young readers, these were, I don't know, these were some pretty good reads to start out with, if you were a young men during those times. And the third choice, so it's Outsiders, Hold Fast, and the third choice was another book by Robert Lipsyte. And that book was called The Contender. The story of, what was his name? Arthur, was it? Young man struggling, impoverished, getting into some local trouble as a young man, and turning his ass into the local gym, where he started a progression towards a struggle, towards a fitness program, towards a change. It's a book about effort and a book about, I guess, self-realization. Again, another great book for a young reader at the time. At least I thought so. I don't know how they'd swing today. I really don't. And I don't want to get into that too much. It's depressing when I start to talk about it. But these were the three that I picked, and I thought it might be interesting to peruse them once again. I don't know. I could change my mind and not do it at all. But I thought I would get into them again, here and there. Again, completely for my own indulgence, if some people decide to enjoy them. I figured, why not contribute in a way to some of the younger readers out there who may have heard of these books. And I don't know, a little something for them, I guess. These are three of the first books I finished and read, and I'm sure most of us are aware of some of the first literature slash novels that we actually made our way through. My memory's pretty good. I can't remember everything, but I do remember the books. I mean, after that, I remember reading the book. Well, it was later on in the 80s. Cocoon, which went on to become a movie. But for all I know, I was reading the movie adaptation novel. Sometimes they come late. I don't know. Finished it because I had started it. I had seen the movie and then I was reading the book, so it felt like I was speeding through it. Then, discovering Stephen King, and that was a lot of fun. A lot of the books there. I mean, I'm not gonna go down that road and bore everybody with the books. But just the same, that raises an interesting idea. Hey, what were some of the books you first stumbled upon, some of the first novels or books that you completed. Do you remember them? Do you remember what you were doing during the time, where you got them, how you felt about them? In the comment section below, why not? Let us know some of the first few books you read as a young person or as an older person later. Whatever. Why? I don't know. Why the hell not? Anyway, yeah. So I'll be picking up on those reads. I haven't decided how I'm going to go about it. I think I was thinking about doing a whispered version of the S.E. Hinton. Maybe all three of them. I don't know just yet. Yeah. So we'll see how that goes. But just the same, there they are. What are your three first books? Leave in the comment section below.